Right, hello. What I'm working on next is the fuel system. So what I want to do is take the fuel line out of the carb, probably disconnect it from the AN fitting up here to put it onto a soft pipe to be able to put it down into a bucket. So when I put fuel in the tank and I pressurize the fuel pump and it runs through the system, it comes up to the fuel pressure regulator. What will come out will actually go into a bucket so I can see how much crap is in the fuel lines and clean them out. So I think what I'll do first will be remove this banjo bolt, remove this line, see what I've got in the way of soft pipes to push on there, and then go from there. Right, and I'm back. So that didn't take too long. So I've removed the AN fitting, I've pushed on this rubber soft pipe, took the banjo bolt out there. So now when the fuel lines are pressurized and the tank's actually filled with fuel, it will come out and it will go down to where there will be a bucket on the floor. What I have realized is that I disconnected the fuel pump from the panel, the wiring panel behind the dashboard. So in order to reconnect it, I'm going to just have to lift the dashboard out. Right, you would have just seen me take the dashboard off in the time lapse, and now what's left behind looks horrendous, I'm sure, as first glance. But I'll quickly explain what's behind the dash so you get it. So you've got the fuse box there, you've got the relays here, this little panel. You've got the water pipe work that goes down to the heater unit, which is under the footwell there. You've got the pull lever here, which actually deals with the valve up there. You've got some wiring this side which goes to the gauges, which will be obviously up in the dash. You've got all the wiring which goes to all the switches and the warning lights, and the white lights to let me know what switches are on and off, which is just over the steering console at the moment, which makes it look messy, but it's not too big a deal. You've got the ignition barrel at the moment, so just so I can control when the power's on. You've got the electronic power steering brain, which I just mounted on a bracket, which actually is the bottom of the bracket, holds the bottom of the dashboard on, keeps that nice and up and out the way. Obviously the EPAS unit itself is sitting here, the motor's just behind the brain in there. Yeah, and you've just got all the wiring is just distributed across this aluminium panel there with quite easy to remove sort of connection boards there, so I can take bits and pieces off and on. You've got the MSD ignition system down here, simple little fused distribution board, which is live power when the ignition's on. You've got a little switch here which allows me to program the EPS easy steer unit there, which is actually pretty good. So that'll affect the power steering force in relation to in relation to the speed of the car. So I have less input into the power steering motor, or from the power steering motor, as the car gets faster and faster. So obviously I don't want full steering assistance at 60, 70 miles an hour, whereas at 0 to say 10 miles an hour I do want full assistance, obviously when parking and manoeuvring. So yeah, that's basically in here. So what I'm going to do next is put this cable here is for the fuel pump. So that's obviously been disconnected so I can turn the power on and not have the fuel pump running dry and damage it. Right, so the plan now is I've just been to Tesco's, I've got a couple of gallons of fuel and the battery's back in the car, the dashboard's off. I've given you a quick talk about what's under the dashboard, all the hidden secrets of the snake's wedding that's down there. So what I'll do is I'll get underneath the car, I'll just check all the fittings on the fuel tank again to make sure that nothing's loose where I've been taking things on and off. There's a drain plug I had fitted in the tank and I'll make sure that's buttoned up tight. I'll pour the fuel in. I know there's 11.5 litres in the can, so I'll pour that in and I'll take a reading off of the top of the fuel sender, the resistance, to see if I'm actually getting a readable resistance change from when it's empty to when I've got 12 litres in there almost. And then I'll reconnect the fuel pump at the front, turn the power on, and as the fuel starts to pump, hopefully it will come out that front pipe, which will go back into the can. I'll just run through the system and then I'll pour it and have a look at how much crap's actually in it. So yeah, I'll have a go at that. Okay, so I've just put 11.5 litres of fuel in the tank, put the cap on. Let's try this. This was 0.26. So it's 2, so 0.23. So we are getting a difference. Turn that off. That means that the sender unit is actually giving a variable resistance, which means that I can now continue to work out empty to full. But what I have just noticed, bad news, is, oh, let's get under here. There's a bit of fuel on the floor, and I've looked up here. In the very corner of this tank, there's a tiny weep coming from it, enough to give a drip. So there you go, that drip's just dripped. Which, thanks Dax, because that's a tank supplied by them for the car. Guaranteed it was tested, pressure tested, everything as it's supposed to have been. I've had bits welded underneath it, but completely miles away from that. The bits I've had done were the drain plug there and the 2 AN fittings, because they just come with push-on connections. So a mile away from the fact I never welded that corner up properly. So anyway, things that's actually gonna, well, it's a problem, but it's not a problem that I'm gonna worry about right now. So I think what we'll do is if I turn the ignition on, the fuel pump should run, and we'll see if actually any fuel comes out. So let's just, and I'll put the camera down. Right, so I'm ready with the switch. I'll just turn the fuel pump on. It is noisy, as you'll hear if I can do it with one hand. Right, that's the fuel pump running, and you'll see, I don't just spill it everywhere. That's pumping fuel. So there's obviously no pressure on the regulator gauge because there's no resistance at the moment, and there is a slight drip from here, so I shall turn it off and turn the power off and have a look at where the drip's coming from. Right, I've just finished flushing the fuel through. So I filled the tank up with 11.5 litres of petrol, and I had a few leaks around the regulator at the front there with the in, return, and then the through to the carb. So I took them all off, put some PTFE tape around it, did them back up nice and tight, and that's fixed all those leaks there. I've got 2 tiny pinhole weeps out of the tank, which I've just been watching, which I don't really know what to do about, apart from obviously the tank's empty now, but air it out, remove the tank again from the car, which was really annoying, and get someone to weld over those patches, which is more frustrating the fact that you've bought the tank from a company that supplied it as part of a kit, saying all their tanks are tested. I even specifically questioned John on that before I got it, because some of the edges looked a bit, but then he's like, no, we test all our tanks. So yeah, having just done that, I've then just taken the drain plug out and drained it into a completely clean oil pan. So I'll flip the camera around and I'll show you what was in the bottom of it. I hope you can see this. It looks like something off the Discovery Channel, gold panning, but yeah, this is how much drilling and swarf and aluminium filings have made their way into the tank, or in the fuel lines, because obviously it's been running going through the return. So yeah, I shall ditch this and I'll do it again, probably not this evening, I'll call it quits today, and I'll do it again and flush the tank out by maybe rocking the car around forwards and backwards, see if I can wash anything out from the inside of the tank. Yeah, well worth doing. Right, so here we have the fuel tank that I've dropped out of the car, annoyingly. I had to, so there's the space underneath where it was, all the lines, all the bolts, everything's been let go. A little bit of rope up there, which is what I used to lift the body off as when I had to, so I'll leave it in place at the moment. So yeah, annoyingly the tank's out because there is a small hole in this bottom corner where it weeps through the weld, and there's another hole marked by the blue there where it weeps through. It's like a porous bit, you can just about see it there. So when it was full of fuel the other day, I think I mentioned in the video, there's a couple of drips through, and I didn't really give it much thought at the time. I knew obviously it had to be fixed, and then the actual implications of fixing it and having to take it all the way out the car again, wash it out, which is what I've done, leave it to air, clean it again, and now hopefully there's absolutely no gas in there so when the guys can weld it. They think they're going to have to cut this whole corner out, now the aluminium's contaminated with fuel. Yeah, it's a bit of a pain in the arse. It was a huge pain in the arse considering this tank was pressure tested allegedly from Dax, and one of the few parts you actually buy complete, which you really don't expect to have hassles with. So I'm going to go and drop it off in a minute over at the guys that made the headers for me, and yeah, see how long it takes them to do it, and then they'll pressure test it properly, and then yeah, we'll get it back in the car, and then hopefully start the car, because this is what's now holding me up, being able to get fuel to the engine. So anyway, I'm going to continue on.